Hello and welcome to an episode of The Brain Game Changer, how heartfelt stories, awareness and education can change the game. Each week we delve into the experiences of amazing humans, advocates and organisations from all walks of life who share their adversities, the triumphs after tragedies, the milestones and those brain game changing moments right here in front of the mic. Through this journey together, we may find that we can learn some valuable tools, knowledge or education that will lead us into becoming game changers for ourselves, for someone around us, or even for our community. My name is Melissa. Thank you for inviting me into your space. It is great to be with you. Welcome to episode 9, season 1 of the Brain Game Changer podcast. In this week's episode, we speak with podcast producer Amelia Rees, who shares the long journey of dealing with a very unexpected diagnosis of an osteoblastoma. Amelia walks us through growing up as a pastor's child, receiving news about that osteoblastoma at the young age of 21, just 2 weeks after announcing her engagement. This resulted in numerous surgeries that eventually led to the decision of removing her left collarbone 7 years later. She is the only person in Australia to have experienced such a procedure. She bravely addresses her continued journey with mental health and how now, on the other side of her 20s, is starting to make decisions about what she wants to do in her future that brings her purpose and joy. Now, I've got to know Amelia over the last couple of months because we collaborate on these amazing interviews that go out to you. Amelia edits them and we talk about the best way to get the message out there. And I also know Amelia is very upbeat. She's very social. She loves a chat. And throughout this interview, Amelia presents as upbeat and full of zest. However, it is very clear life is not always experienced in this way. Let's get into the interview. Good morning, Amelia, and welcome to the Brain Game Changer podcast. It is great to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
All I can say is when I was reading through your journey is wow. The listeners they're in for a ride.
Yep.
Let's just say that. And I could so resonate, even though what we've been through is very different. I'm almost going to get teary in the sense of how I could read it. I could visualize. I was almost sitting there with you, holding your hand and sharing the moment with you in some of the moments that you experienced. All I'm going to say is kudos to you for where you are now.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Like I always do with all my podcasts, we get a little bit of a backstory because I really love the fact that we get to know a little bit more about you. So I'm just going to ask you a little bit about where you're from, where you live, a bit about your upbringing, and then we're going to lean into some more heavier stuff.
Some good stuff. Some good, interesting stuff.
You said it.
Well, I was born in Victoria, in Geelong. My dad is a pastor of a church, so we moved around a lot when I was younger. So I was born in Victoria, then we moved to Perth, then lived in Tassie for a while. Then at about age 10, moved up to the central coast of New South Wales. Then we moved up to Queensland when I was 16, which was awesome to be really close to family and all of that sort of stuff. And started to settle into life as a Queensland girl.
Well, you definitely have the better weather, that's for sure.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
First of all, thank you for sharing that. One thing that I'm really curious about is because I haven't grown up in this, and I know a lot of people who haven't grown up in this. What was it like growing up in a family where your parents or your father is a pastor and you moved around? So what was life like for you? I can imagine a lot of church.
Yes, lots of church.
And, being around a belief system and a community that resonated with you. What was that like?
Yeah, I think two sides of it. Obviously, having a faith it's a big part of my life, and it's been able to give me a lot of peace throughout the years. Being a pastor's kid too, or PKs as we call them.
You got your own little title.
Oh, yeah. We usually lived in what's called the manse, which is right next door to the church. So you're 20 metres away all the time. And when I say church, to visualize, we're not talking Catholic, we're not talking mega churches or anything, that we're talking your small little local church, 200, 300 people. So a very close-knit community of people. That sense of community was just amazing. Like growing up, it was good to learn how to deal with a multitude of people. As a pastor's kid, you see lots of people coming into the home for counselling and all that sort of stuff. I think it would have created a bigger sense of empathy in me because you see people's struggles a bit more than, say, you would if you were in a different environment. It's always been a really positive experience for me.
That's awesome. And, you know, I think as humans, we've got our journey of what is an important faith to us, what's an important belief to us. I think we're a big rainbow of different beliefs, and it's great that it's, you know, it's presented as a really positive experience for you growing up.
Yeah, definitely.
As we lean into the heavy stuff, the big stuff, the next journey of events that occurred in your life, a young man entered your life by the name of Marshall. Let's talk about him.
He sure did. Well, technically, he walked into my life when I was 16. We dated for a year. And then I was like, oh, blah, 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 we're going to get married. And he was 17 and he freaked out and dumped me, which is fair enough. I understand.
He ran for the hills
because he's like, oh, 17 is a bit young.
You're already looking for the wedding dress, and he's like, I'm just working on a part-time job and working on getting my license.
Exactly. A bit full on for him. But it all worked out in the end because 5 years later we got back together and, got engaged. And then 2 weeks after that, we found out that I had a tumour in my collarbone, which is the big mic drop.
You segued well into that moment. We're going to get right there. How did it come about, learning about the tumour? Were you experiencing different things in your body? Were you experiencing symptoms? How do we get to the point where they're like, you've got a tumour?
It happened really quickly in the sense that I was sort of living with some shoulder pain for a little bit, but I was working in cafes, quite a physical job, so I just put it down to just being a bit sore. Eventually went and got an x-ray, and within half an hour my GP called me and was like, you need to come down to my office. We need to talk. Okay. So we get there and he's like, look, you've got a tumour of some sort. We need to get you booked into the Princess Alexandra Hospital, which is where all the oncologists live, and we need to get this checked out because we don't know what it is. So it was a shock. It had never crossed my mind that something like this would happen.
Well, you're only 21 years old. You know, you're at the vibrance of life and outliving it and, you know, working in hospitality and enjoying yourself. And then you get told the news of that. So you went to the hospital, and did you have a biopsy?
Within, I think, about a week or so, booked in for a biopsy. They just did a little hole puncture into my collarbone, took a little sample, and the tumour that they found is called an osteoblastoma, which is a rare benign neoplasm for those medical people. And it accounts for only about 1% of all primary bone tumours. So the reason they were so worried about me is because usually when you get a bone tumour, it's secondary, which means it started somewhere else in your body and then it's travelled. So they did all the scans, all the PET scans, all the MRIs, all the bits that you go through, did the biopsy, and they originally said that it was an osteosarcoma, which is the cancerous version of the tumour. After about 2 weeks, they changed that diagnosis because of the size of the tumour. So an osteoblastoma and an osteosarcoma, which are cousins, basically look the same in all their cells, but an osteoblastoma is basically bigger. So a sarcoma can't get bigger than 2 centimetres, basically is what they say. So because it was big, they went, okay, we're pretty sure, and it's nowhere else in your body, we're pretty sure that it's benign. So, yeah, and that's when all the conversations of how to deal with it started.
That must have been quite a moment in hearing that news. And I'm just going to add, thank you for explaining about the osteoblastoma. In doing a little bit more research about it, as you say, rare benign bone, it tends to affect boys more than girls or men more than women for whatever reason that presents itself. Even though this is rare, it's the more common areas, as you've stated, is usually in bigger bones and the lower region of our body or the spine, the legs. Mm-hmm. And so to have this happen near your left collarbone, it's rare, and then it's rare again.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And they say that, 3% of all bone tumours are benign. So that's a pretty low number in that. And then only 8% of that are osteoblastomas. Whatever the maths is on that, I'm not no maths genius.
No, I know what you mean. Again, it's all rare. The main word we're hearing is rare.
Very rare. And that became a problem, I guess, or a solution to be found by all of the teams, because you've got bones, you've got all your arteries and your nerve columns which run behind that collarbone. I needed plastic surgeons as well because they had to shift muscles around. So yes, it's a very unique surgery. I'm the only one in Australia to have had it. Yeah, my tumour's up at the Mayo Clinic up in America, which is top-rated hospital in the US. So special is the word they use.
Yes, true. Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to break that down. There's a lot of information there, and I'm going to break that down. So we've established that's an osteoblastoma.
Mm-hmm.
We're very aware that it's rare. It's even, again, in a rare position within your body. We've collaborated a whole medical team around you. So from that time of the biopsy, and they've realised exactly what's happening, what happens next?
So my first surgery was in October 2013. So to explain, so everyone has a collarbone. You've got your two bones on top of your chest and you can feel them. Right in the middle of my collarbone, and then you've got like your bone marrow on the inside. Most of your bones are hollow. There was a mass that they found. So it would grow and literally push out my bone. So there was splitting and cracking within the bone itself, and it grew very quickly. It ended up being in between a golf ball and a tennis ball. So very big. Yeah.
That's big. It must have been very visually obvious as well.
Definitely. And it got to the point too that because it was so large on my neck, when I would turn my head to the left-hand side, I couldn't breathe, basically.
You were knocking into it.
Yeah.
Hindering your airway almost.
Exactly. Yeah, so I had my first surgery. They attempted to go into the bone, scoop out all of the tumour, and then they actually went into my hip as well, took bone marrow from that, put that in the gap in the hopes that it would all grow and heal itself. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. It reoccurred.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask you, when you say it reoccurred, what happened?
It grew back. It grew back with a vengeance, yeah.
And is that quite common as well? Is that normal for it to do that?
So there's an osteoblastoma, and then there's an aggressive osteoblastoma, which again is even rarer. Again, lucky me, got it. So cells, you only need to leave one behind and it's going to just keep going.
Multiply and keep going.
The morning of my best friend's hen's day, 2016 it was, I was washing my hair in the shower, as you do, putting your arms up in the air, and I just relaxed my arms and my collarbone just snapped in half because there was nothing left.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it just snapped out of the blue.
On the left side in that area?
In that exact spot. So, and I'd sort of started to get pain a bit in there and was like, oh, and I had an appointment, follow-up appointment coming up in like 3 or 4 weeks after that. So I was like, oh, I'll just wait. I'm not going to call and bother them, that sort of thing. So probably should have in hindsight.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're going through something that, you're not an expert in this. You're living it and you're receiving a lot of information about it and you're trying to digest and process it, but it's also normal what you experience. You're just like, I'm experiencing a bit of pain, still healing. Have I overexerted myself? You go through all those sort of questions. So what happens in that moment when that collarbone snaps? Obviously, quick ride to the hospital.
Yeah, collarbone broke in the morning. I was like, nah, I can't miss this event. Pushed through the day. We went on the Wild Boys afloat at nighttime and, all that sort of fun stuff. And it wasn't until the morning after that I actually passed out in the hotel room that my friend was like, maybe we should get you the ambulance.
So you still turned up to the hen's night?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, Amelia.
I know. I was convinced this thing was not going to take over my life.
And fair enough. So you've attended the hen's night with a snapped collarbone. You've enjoyed yourself in whatever capacity you did. And then the next morning you passed out and your friends are like, let's get her to the hospital.
Yeah, that's it. So, and then basically I got there and they said, look, we have to let the bone heal as much as it can for the next 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever it was. And then they plan to go in and do surgery again.
So they've wanted you to heal and then they want to operate again.
Which they did, which again was unsuccessful because the tumour had actually become vascular. So you've got all of your nerve columns and your main arteries in your neck that run right behind your collarbone. They sit right there. And so the tumour had actually attached into some of those blood vessels and basically became a vessel itself. This was some of the symptoms. Whenever my heart rate would go up, I would get extreme pain in there because there's that pulsing of the blood moving in and out of this tumour and pushing on the bone that's there, and very, very painful. And I probably dealt with that extreme pain for a lot of the time, I would say, like 3 or 4 years, probably solid. And I would get what I would call them pain attacks, where just out of the blue, I could be sitting there doing nothing, and then I would go into extreme pain to the point that doctors actually prescribed me the green whistle, the green whistle that they give you in the ambulance.
Yeah, the ambulance whistle.
So they prescribed that to me so I could handle some of that pain. So it was really, pain management was a massive thing. And then when they went to do the surgery the second time around, when they punched into the bone, I actually bled out like 2 litres of blood because they hadn't realised that it had become vascular. So they basically just stitched me up and said, we kept you alive, but we're just going to have to keep monitoring this. And it was a cycle.
You're thinking you're going in to have more surgery done, and then they come back to you and say, this is what we experienced when we were operating on you. You lost 2 litres of blood. We had to zip you up, and the good news is you're still with us. That must have been quite overwhelming and almost surreal and an out-of-body experience to hear.
Do you know what? It's funny because I remember in that moment, my thoughts were, oh, that means I'm going to have another surgery. And I was potentially on, strong painkillers and all that sort of stuff. But my thought was,
yes,
oh, this is not over.
You want it to be, and rightly so. You'd already taken up enough of your, your prime years, your 20s. You've talked about your journey in managing the pain. I mean, I experienced pain in a brain hemorrhage type of way, and I experienced it for months afterwards. But I get the feeling your pain is a different type of level to manage. Can you describe what it was like for you during that time, and how was it impacting you even just emotionally, socially, just everyday living? What was it like for you during that time?
Very tough. It's one of those things now when I look back on it, it's a blur. But it definitely trickled into many aspects of my life. One example would be that I didn't have a straight, coherent conversation with my husband for sometimes six months at a time if I was on the endone and all that sort of stuff. Would have full conversations, wouldn't remember, those sorts of things. Made it very difficult to work. It's hard to focus when you're in that sort of level of pain. You'll potentially be out in public and get one of those little pain attacks that I would talk about, and then all of a sudden you feel really embarrassed and you don't want to, draw attention to yourself, and it's very hard to sleep. Lots and lots of issues.
It sounds like it was challenging, for sure.
Yeah, very challenging. And long-term as well. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is because this went on in and out of surgeries for about 7 years, all of those brain, neural pathways that are created throughout your brain are there, and they're really strong. So it's hard to sort of go back and counteract them as well, which has been a big part of the journey.
You went through this all throughout your 20s. I mean, our brain doesn't fully get to its full growth adult capacity until we're sort of in our mid-20s, and you're dealing with all this at that time. In 2018, you know that the third surgery is coming. However, I guess part of your process in leading up to that point is you start and create a support group on Facebook in November 2017.
Part of that group was a bit of an outlet for me for 2 reasons, because, church family and all that sort of stuff, big communities of people, so it can be quite overwhelming when all those people are messaging you all the time. So that was part of the reason I did that, so I could keep everyone up to date. And
yeah, you create the boundaries in that scenario.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you for allowing me to access to this group and, seeing what's on there. I credit you. You're so brave. Like, it is all out there. You talk about the process. You talk about what the doctors say. You talk about what you're feeling on certain days. You show where the scars are, what it feels like. you're creating such awareness about something that as we've clearly identified, is really rare. You've probably also got a great support network around you to help support you, in sharing this journey. So I'll make a connection in the sense like when my brain hemorrhage happened last year, back in May 2021, we were in the midst of a global pandemic, and I lived in a city that was experiencing major lockdowns, and I went through that. So hospital visits for me were really restricted, was really strict security. It's funny, upon reflection, I don't have any photos, I don't have any videos. And I think also because mine happened so quickly, I was heavily sedated and there was so much protocol. I'm not using the word luxury, I didn't have the opportunity to do so. But I think it's wonderful that you have, because the name of this podcast and what we're doing is creating awareness, even in watching videos and reading posts of yours, and even in this conversation today. I know that I'm going to walk away a lot more aware and a lot more empathic to these sort of scenarios. We're going to lean into that preparation for that third, and I'm saying final.
Yes.
Surgery.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome that it was. It's
Yes.
unfortunate it was happening again, but so amazing that it was the third and final. What is the preparation? Is it different to the previous surgeries and previous occurrences that have occurred along the way?
Yeah. Yes. Preparation-wise, it was very different. So originally I had the oncology department, which were handling all of the surgeries and all that sort of stuff. And after that second surgery, when they realised the tumour had become, connected to all the blood vessels, they went, okay, we're going to need a thoracic surgeon, which is the person who looks after your blood vessels and your heart and all that. So basically a heart surgeon. And then they also brought in a plastic surgeon as well. Well, there's going to be a void when you take away a collarbone.
Had they told you that your collarbone was going to be removed at this point?
Oh, yes. And it was the best day ever.
Really? What makes you say that?
Because I wanted it gone. You leave it there, it regrows. You leave it there, it regrows. I was like, surely we can just chop it out. It's not that simple.
I can imagine.
It's not something that they like to do. From what I understand, it hasn't been done in Australia where they just take a collarbone out. I think it was an 8 or 9 hour surgery in total. So what they had to do was chop from where my shoulder connects to the collarbone. And then at the other end, they chopped a chunk out of my sternum and removed that as well and lifted up the whole thing. They said if we don't do that, that's just going to continue to grow. But they were very hesitant to do that surgery. It took them about 6 months, I say, to psych themselves into it.
Yeah, and I suppose they look at it through a totally different lens to what we do. We just want results. We just want to get the damn thing over and done with. And they know the body better than what we do in different ways. And it sounds like you had quite a team. And I'm sure in that 8 or 9 hour period, there was different layers and turnovers and changeovers, and almost like passing the baton as people came in, people came out during that. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. And they were very worried because artery runs behind there, but also your main nerve column. They didn't seem to be so concerned about the artery because there's a heart surgeon there. He's like, if I nick it, you'll be right. Like, we'll fix it up. But that nerve column, which is about as wide as your artery. So from what I understand, it's about 1.5 centimetres wide. And that is responsible for all the nerves on the left side of your body. So there was really big risk that I could come out and have either permanent pins and needles, total numbness on one side. They wouldn't know until I came out. Thankfully, that didn't happen. And I don't have any numbness or pain or anything like that now, but they were really worried about that section of it because it was a surgery that hadn't been done before. And I actually got a copy of photos and all that sort of stuff of what your nerve column looks like underneath your collarbone.
That would have been fascinating. I know when you get x-rays and pictures of your own body, it's just like, wow, this is what I internally look like. This is fascinating. You've come out of a grueling 8 to 9 hour surgery. You post up, you're very visual in showing what your body looks like at that time. There are 2 really big aggressive scars. You're dosed up to the eyeballs in managing the pain, and also even getting through an 8 to 9 hour surgery, surviving that as well. How long were you in hospital during this time, and what was part of the recovery going forward?
I was in hospital for about 10 or 12 days, I think it was, in total. The first week or so was the hardest because you would know this, everyone needs to go to the bathroom. Everyone needs to pee at some stage during the day. But it's really difficult to do that when you've got 15 cords hanging out of you.
Yes, that's it, yeah.
Trying to untangle yourself and trying to make it in time, hoping that you make it because you've got all these wires coming out of you. And yeah, I have to laugh about it. That's my sort of approach. I always find it's a little bit funny because it's like.
It is what it is. I know, it's funny you say that. I was 48 and I wet the bed a few times. So, you know, and you sort of go back into this inner child.
100%.
Yeah, and it's like I'm wetting the bed, and then in my scenario, or part of the process was I had to drink 3 litres of water a day. 3 litres, 3 litres, 3 litres. So I was on the buzzer every 10 minutes. Need a bedpan. I need this. I need that. And and bless them, they're doing the most amazing job and doing the best they can. But by the time they'd get there, I'd be like, wet the bed. Or they'd give me a pan, I'd get it in the pan. But because there was so much water, it went out of the pan onto the bed. You know, it was like a waterfall. So it's humbling, those moments. You're in the moment, you're thinking, oh, this is just horrific in itself. But later on, you're just like, oh, it's quite funny.
Those funny moments.
So you're in hospital for 10 to 12 days. What are the conversations that you're having with the medical team upon returning home? What's required? What do you need to do?
Lots and lots of physio. They didn't really want me moving it around too much. They just wanted the muscles to heal before we started stretching them out and trying to move them around because they were totally relocated. So there was a good chunk of time where I was just sitting around at home, and then it was physio. And
how often were you doing physio on a weekly basis?
I think at the beginning it was once a fortnight, and then at one stage we jumped back into once a week, and then once a fortnight, once every 3 weeks, that sort of thing. So it was regular, you know, for them as well. They're not sure how my muscles are going to react to this sort of surgery because I hadn't done it before, which was great because I got lots of specialised attention.
Yeah, and well, obviously needed to get you to the recovery and to the position where you are now. One thing we mentioned earlier, one thing I wanted to lead into, and again, I find this really fascinating, is the Mayo Clinic.
Mm-hmm. From what I understand, they sent it over there just to triple check that it wasn't cancer and that there wasn't that risk that it would pop up somewhere else further down the track. I still get follow-up appointments once a year just to check all that sort of stuff anyway. But because it is such a rare tumour, you know, I might take it, do the research. If it can help someone else, great. I always say I haven't been to America, but part of me has.
Yeah.
Just a teeny
just
tiny
a little
part
of you has been permanently sitting in Minnesota.
That's the one.
The fact that a hospital in Australia was reaching out to them says the significance of what every medical person who was part of your treatment and part of your journey was dealing with.
I remember the doctor who worked on me, he said, oh, we had a meeting about you today. And I was like, oh, yeah, who's we? And he's like, oh, there was about 30 people in the room. I was like, okay, righto. Some of them are students and stuff like that because it was so rare. They like to bring in the students and ask me questions. I'm open book. I'm like, you can ask me whatever you like, mate. Go for it.
Well, I'm going to ask you about that because it's funny. I had students being in the hospital. What I found in my little scenario is they would give me my meds. Like I used to get, like, it's almost like the saying, breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper. They'd give me my full load in the morning of my drugs.
Yeah, right.
You know, and then obviously throughout the day, it's almost like maintenance on top of that. And they'd give it to me, and then I found probably about 45 minutes later, as they've just really landed into my body and taken me to, you know, interesting and internal places in my psyche, the doctor would come in with about 6 students, all in their long white coats and their clipboards and trying to ask me questions. And I remember saying to him one day, can you pick another time to come in because I've got no idea what you're saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I guess in your scenario, because of it is so rare and doctors are so intrigued, they're probably getting all these medical students, go see Amelia, go see what she's experienced. And I guess for them in the start of their medical career, they're experiencing something that they will probably never see again. What was it like in those moments? What sort of questions were they asking you?
Yeah, it was usually the same sort of questions. But occasionally you'd get those students or even nurses who would take the time to ask, how's this impacting your mental health? How are you going with this? Is there any support we can give you? And all that sort of stuff. I don't have any specific stories of students, nothing that I can share anyway that doesn't have to do with all my bits hanging out. So
nothing appropriate. That's for after 9 p.m. radio or something. Okay, I get it. I'm giving the fingers on the nose and I'm giving you a wink. I get it. All right, that's awesome. I love it. One thing that I'm hearing throughout this amazing conversation is your humor and your zest for just being in the moments, even through the highs and the lows. It sounds like being a social, chatty person and having humor and trying to see the light in every scenario is probably also a big thing that helped get you through. One person that sounds like they've been a pillar throughout this moment, and it's interesting whenever you talk about him, your face does light up. He's a big part of your world, is Marshall. We've talked about how you've met him. You've talked about getting married, but where's the timeline? I'm going to go back a bit. Where's the timeline of when all this occurred?
Yeah, so Marsh and I got together in January of 2013. We were engaged by that August of 2013. 2 weeks later, we found out that I had the tumour. 2 weeks after that, I had a biopsy. 4 weeks after that, so middle of October, I had my first surgery. And then we got married on the 18th of January 2014. So all of my first surgery, diagnosis, everything was before we got married. And I gave Marshall an out. I said, look, if you don't want to deal with this, that's okay. I understand.
Well, he obviously said, no, I'm not going anywhere.
Oh, he did. He definitely
did. That's
did.
amazing.
There's this beautiful song by Alicia Keys, which sort of became our song throughout that time. And her main line in that is, I'm going to love you like I'm going to lose you.
Oh,
and for us, that became very real and very true. So you go from looking at your future and dreaming about getting married and blah, blah, blah to,
let's see how much time are we going to have together?
Exactly. And it's a big mental shift, big mental shift.
I can imagine. Yeah. He sounds like a very strong man, because you've described him. You're the social, you could chat underwater, and he's more the sort of introvert, quiet person, but he sounds like the silent pillar of strength.
100%. He's my rock for sure. And he's always been really good at, one, bringing me back down to reality, because you can get caught up in your thoughts and go off to all sorts of places, but also being really realistic at the same time. So there wasn't any, don't worry about it, it's going to be fine. There was more that, this is actually really crap, and that's okay for it to be crap, babe. It's okay. Have a cry about it. Be angry about it. That's fine.
Yeah, that's it. You're allowed to be really peed about it.
Yeah.
You're allowed to be really angry. That's okay.
And Marsh and I have always been really good in that sense, because we've both battled with sort of mental health a little bit, me more so much than him. But then there is that mutual understanding too, of some days I would just wake up and be like, I just feel horrible today and I can't tell you why. I don't know what's going on with my brain. He's like, that's okay. But all I needed to say was, I'm having a not great day, because I also don't want to project onto him that he thinks I'm mad at him for some other reason or whatever, So the communication was always really strong between Marsh and I, and that made a huge difference, because I could just be real about what I was feeling, and he was like, yeah, that's okay.
But I guess even for him, I'm sure he went through his reflective moments. He became the caretaker, but he also probably had to grow up very quickly, because, we can still have a little bit of rat bag in us in our 20s. And as we've stated earlier, the brain doesn't fully become adult until later in the 20s. So he probably had to really internalise and think, okay, I've really got to step up into a way that I never thought imaginable.
Yeah, he really did take on that caretaker role.
Yes.
Which is another thing too that not many people talk about. There's a lot of sick people in the world, and there's also a lot of people looking after those sick people.
Yes.
And I think it's really important to recognise the importance and the value in those people, and to give them support as well, and to be mindful of that in your circles.
Yes.
Because it is really hard. It's really hard seeing, there was several times where Marshall would come home and I was pretty much on the floor, passed out from pain. So he would have to catch me on occasion. He could read those signs. He could see when my body wasn't doing so well. He'd pull me out of that. it's on all the time. He had to make sure I was okay every day. And that's a big responsibility, a lot of pressure.
I mean, that's massive on top of just the everyday functioning, cooking, cleaning, making sure things are functioning in the everyday world, the necessities. And then he's dealing with the huge possibilities of how your body can respond and how you're going to be throughout your recovery.
Yeah, and then also balancing that with going, okay, well, we don't know how much time we have together, so let's just enjoy it while we can, whatever that looks like.
Is Marshall part of any support groups that helps him through the journey of your recovery?
There was that big support network of the church, and there's that many people checking in on us, making us meals, all of that sort of stuff. So we were very supported and very, like you said, very blessed to have that sort of support network around us. You know, for us, there was a lot of comfort in people praying for us and
the power of prayer.
100%, yeah.
I'm going to ask a question because you describe yourself as an active Christian, and it's a beautiful, positive part of your life. Because I've been asked this, and I mean, I'm not of faith, but I've been asked this question. Did you question your faith? Did you question life when this was happening? Did you question why me? Why is this happening to me?
Oh, 100%. I think that's human. But for me too, there's that whole, the world degrades, bodies degrade. We're using all sorts of chemicals and all that sort of stuff in the world right now. This sort of thing is a lot more common. So there wasn't so much of a, why me? Do I deserve this? It was just like, oh, okay, this is a fact of life. We're just going to have to deal with it. That's the way I approached it.
So it's almost like two hats. You did go through some low moments, but at the same time, you sort of had this faith and optimism going through the process.
A big sense of peace. For me, there was a really big sense of peace going, look, this is out of my control. There is nothing I can do. Doctors have said there's nothing you can do to help your body, basically, except for manage pain. When you go in that cycle for a long time, it's like, okay, well, there's nothing I can do to actually physically improve this. All I can do is give it to God and just go, okay, if I'm going to live, I'm going to live. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die. That's just the way it is. I don't know, maybe that's a bit pessimistic.
No, it's how you coped. It's how you coped in that moment. And also you're in survival mode and you're reflecting now. If we'd had this conversation with you while you're in the midst of it, who knows what the conversation would be like. Whereas now you're on, I loosely use the term on the other side, but you're in a position now where you can reflect on that time.
Anyone who goes through any sort of trauma, no matter what it is actually making the time to reflect on it. Because when you're in that moment, you can't. You know, there's only so much processing you can do when you're in that survival, vital float mode in your brain.
True. You've brought up the word mental health, and I'm going to lean into this. You know, through your teenage years, you experienced a significant event in your life, and that sort of spiraled you into a journey of managing mental health.
Yeah, so I was 15, living in New South Wales, and then I had a big life-changing event. I lost a friend of mine in quite a traumatic way, and that sort of really started a bit of my, I guess, mental health journey. And so I struggled with that for a few years. And because I had experienced trauma when I was younger and I didn't seek any help till I was 19, was the first time I went and saw a psychologist. And that was a game changer, just to go, oh, okay, it's actually okay to talk things out and verbalize things and say how you're feeling. And I realized very quickly that if I bottle things up and don't talk about things, that's when I become very depressed, because it just internalizes and internalizes. That's one thing that I had learnt when I was younger. If I don't talk about it and if I don't open up, I do go into myself. And that's when it gets dangerous for me. When I get quiet, I'm sad.
Yeah.
And I've learned to read those signs now that I'm a bit older. And if, you know, Marshall's learnt them.
It must have challenged your mental health. And you've openly admitted that you are on a support plan and medication to help with the mental health and your everyday functioning of it. Also being on all these other painkillers, did it impact your mental health as well?
It was the times that I was just stuck at home by myself. I felt like the sick girl. I felt like I didn't have any value. I couldn't contribute to society by working or anything like that. Or I would have those moments where it's like, okay, all I need to do today is put on one load of washing. And then if I couldn't, I'd be really hard on myself. And that sort of habit sort of started to creep in. I have always seen psychologists, well, since I was 19, seen psychologists and gotten that professional help. For one example, I was seeing a psychologist at one stage because I was getting lots of flashbacks, I guess. It wasn't official PTSD because it had been too long since the trauma, but I was getting flashbacks and It was scary. So I went and saw a psychologist and she's like, look, your brain is still in fight or flight mode. And she used this awesome example where she said, if you walk into a room and you see a snake, how are you going to react? I'm like, oh, you'd freak out and run away. She's like, and if there was a fly buzzing around you, what would your reaction be? And I was like, oh, just to swat it away. And she said, okay, so that's your fight and your flight reaction. Instead of running away, maybe you can say to yourself, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a fly. It's not a snake, it's just a fly. And so little mantras like that where I was like in a panic because something had grazed along my skin and I'd bounce back to the past, I go, okay, it's just a fly. It's not a snake. I'm not in danger. So just little tips like that really helped pull you out of those really hard, dark moments.
Great visualization techniques.
And just because your brain is telling you that it's a snake doesn't mean that it is. But it takes practice to learn that. It takes practice to recognize the panic or the feeling that you've got is not necessarily true or truthful. Your brain can do some crazy things to you, but you got to learn how to control that to a certain extent as well.
Retraining the brain and relearning better patterns to step into a better version of ourselves.
The last, say, 2 years post-op have been a lot of healing and reflecting, which is something that I didn't really expect. I sort of, in my mind, I was like, okay, once surgery's done, I'll be fine. I'll be back to normal, whatever that normal is. Not really taking into consideration that I've been through 7 years of trauma and I have to actually deal with that.
Yeah, the enormity. It's huge.
Massive. Once that physical part was over, it was like, oh, now I need to work on my brain. So that's been the journey for the last couple of years, seeing psychs, life coaches, those sorts of people to try to help gain a connection to myself. Because when you are sick with a long-term illness, or in my situation, I became very disconnected from my body. There wasn't that self-love that people talk about, and I've sort of only now getting on that journey of going, okay, who am I and what do I want that to look like and how can I use that in the future? Marsh and I were married for 9 years in January. Up until recently, we hadn't really had those future plan conversations. What do we want retirement to look like? Because it wasn't really on the cards. There was a possibility it wasn't on the cards. So why would you talk about that? Because it really hurts to think that,
Yeah, that's it. Why would you give yourself hope when the reality is you're having to deal with what the reality is in front of you right at that time?
Exactly, yeah. And going day by day to that switch of going, okay, there's actually tomorrow. So what does that look like?
This has taken almost a third of your life, what you've gone through. You enjoy work, you enjoy being around people, you love that social interaction. And it must have been quite challenging at times when you spent long periods at home through the recovery, through the journey. Was there a point where you were able to get back to the role that you were doing, or was there a significant change in your employment and your work ability?
So there was definitely a significant change in my work ability, especially because I was on such high painkillers. I couldn't be trusted to talk to any other human, customer service and all that sort of stuff. And it was something that I was anxious about as well. I didn't want to represent the lawyer that I was working for in a bad light. So I said, look, I need to step back. I need to be at home and resting. And she said, look, I have a podcast that I've started. If you can learn how to edit it, then I can give that work to you. You can at least have something to do throughout the week. Which I did, and I just fell in love with it. So rather than going back to work, I actually went, I'm going to try give podcast production a go and see where it goes, because I didn't have anything to lose either. Took on a couple of extra new clients, did a lot of learning, and so now I am a full-time podcast producer at Pretty Podcast. There's the plug.
I love the name. It's a great name.
I love pink, so I was like, and it was girly. Target audiences women, so...
There you go. You've ticked all the boxes with Pretty.
That's it.
Can you tell us what that involves? Sort of, if someone said, what do you do on a weekly basis, or what's your day-to-day runnings of Pretty Podcasts? How would you describe it?
So in this example, like yourself, you would send me a raw audio file of just your recording, and basically I can take that and turn it into a podcast. So that includes the editing, show notes, creating images, whatever sort of people need, and with the real goal to help give people time back, because it is quite time consuming, as you would know. It can be quite technical and stuff like that as well, but it is something that people really love doing because it's such a great connection point, and it's a great way for clients to know you, like you, and then trust you as well without ever meeting you. So yeah, I just really fell in love with the platform, and that connection piece of, even though I was at home, I could still listen to people talk and sort of connect in that way. So it's been a game changer for me. It's been great.
It makes sense in what you're saying, because a big part of you, you're a very social being. You get to experience it through a different lens where you don't know the person, but you feel like you're getting connected to someone because you're hearing the stories. It's a role that has integrity and dignity. As in my instance, we're sharing stories, and we're sharing stories about really significant events that have occurred in people's lives. So to put that story in the hands of someone, you have to be able to hand that over and have that trust to know that when it eventually goes from the raw audio to then go out into the world, that it's from a space that's respectable for everyone involved. So that must be something that you really value and that's important to you.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And it's nice too, because most podcasts are either fortnightly or weekly. I get that regular client interaction as well, which is really nice. You sort of build a rapport and a relationship with people, and yeah, it's really lovely. I love it.
And I guess, as we know, podcasts have just taken over the world in the last, significantly 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess COVID highlighted that even more, because we weren't connecting physically or in our environment. We needed ways to connect and to feel like we were part of a community in other ways. You've probably come on board at a really good time to do all this.
Yeah, it was totally unintentional. It was just sort of more of a, let's give this a go, got nothing to lose.
I can resonate with that. You've gone through your adversity and I've gone through an adversity, and we're both doing things that we never would have thought would be part of our daily life in a million years. And it took something like that to happen to totally segue us into different directions. And then now that you're in the role and now that it's part of your life, you just sort of think, I can't imagine it never not being part of my life now.
Yeah, and that's the thing, when you go through those adversities, it makes you stop and go, okay, what's my purpose in life? What's the reason that I'm doing this? And reevaluating things. And unless you've been through some sort of life-threatening experience, or you're actually really aware of that mindset, it's not something that you think about, but it's like, what am I going to do with my life? I've got a second chance, just like you do.
So true, so true. And you've used the word purpose, so I'm going to segue there nicely. So something that's also come into your life within the last 18 months is something that's also fueling your soul and providing a new sense of purpose, is that you're a director of a charity called Raising Dignity. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's just a baby charity. There's a group of about 4 of us that are on the official board. So there was a lady that was attending my parents' church. Tabby Sangwa is her name. She's an African refugee from Congo. She's been here for about 12 years, but was in like a tent refugee camp, like 6 kids, and it's just a hectic backstory. And so we've built a really strong relationship with her over the years. She named one of her kids after my mum, that sort of thing. It was just lovely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so she started it sort of on her own. And then when I found out about it, I was like, well, maybe we should try to do this legally and properly and all that sort of stuff. And that's how my involvement sort of jumped in. It's an area which is prone to significant trauma for the people who live there. And we really wanted to give the women there some dignity back, hence the Raising Dignity. So the first thing we did just to start out was just to clothe the kids, because there was about 130 kids there who were being looked after by amazing humans who sort of took them into their own homes. So we've set up a little school, given them a bit of education, dressed them, and all of those sort of little things, although they seem tiny, especially the clothing.
Oh, no, they're amazing milestones in that community.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing milestones, amazing achievements.
100%. And also it goes to show that human, that small child or that woman or whoever it is, if they're dressed well, someone cares about them. They're actually less likely to become...
Victims.
Yeah, victims, yeah.
And susceptible to experiencing trauma or various forms of acts that can occur on them.
That's exactly right. And even like we've recently been able to get one of those old school push pedal sewing machines, and the staff members, all the teachers have made like matching uniforms and taken photos, and it's just amazing how that really elevates them. Such small things in our world can really elevate the world and the needs of somebody else, and they're just amazing humans.
I can imagine all of you sitting around, and this woman stands up and she's brave and she shares her story. I can just imagine in that moment there was probably you could hear a pin drop with what she's sharing, what she's been through.
Unbelievable. Like some of the stories, like we're talking about a woman in the bush with 5 kids and a 3-month-old hiding from soldiers, covering the mouth of her baby to keep him quiet and stuff like that. Like just stories you just can't even wrap your mind around.
She also probably feels empowered now as well. You know, after telling her story, she was around a group of people who just thought, well, let's do something. So that's awesome. I can imagine it gives you a sense of purpose and also seeing this is what I can do now.
Exactly, yeah, and all that future planning. Like I'd love to go over there one year, spend a bunch of time, do some building or whatever that looks like. It really does give that sense of purpose, and it's nice to be able to give back knowing that those tiny things can make a huge impact on the people over there.
That's it. What's interesting and what I've observed over the years, and even like I've travelled a lot in meeting different people in all walks of life, no matter what country I've been in, it's usually these sort of opportunities where you get to go somewhere and you get to participate and volunteer and almost like pay forward your services. They're the most enriching that they've talked about.
Oh, definitely.
It almost enriches us more than it enriches the people that we're trying to help.
Yeah, I agree.
The name of the podcast is called The Brain Game Changer, How Heartfelt Stories, Awareness and Education Can Change the Game. If there's one vital piece of information or one golden nugget that you'd like our listeners to become aware of, what would it be?
You're not alone. Any sort of trauma can feel really isolating, but it's only isolating if you let it. And that's something that I've learned. The burden of hurt is less when there's 2 to carry it, or 3 to carry it, or 100 to carry it. So share your heart, say where you're at. The worst thing that's going to happen is that person is not going to be able to support you, and then the person who will come along. And that includes psychologists, doctors, whatever that looks like. Just be open because you deserve it. You deserve to put yourself first and to not be sad or in a low place or in pain, whatever that looks like for you. Just keep pushing back. And it's not so much living day by day. It's appreciating the days that you have, because you really don't know when that last time's going to be. So that'd be my first one, I would say, that you're not alone. And call that friend. Sometimes when we've got people in our lives who are sick or unwell, we don't really know what to say. And I think that's the key. You don't have to say anything.
You just need to show up. Just show up.
Just be there.
That's it. So important. That's really good advice, that sense of not being alone, because people go through their stages where they're confused and they feel alone. So that's really good advice about just continually reach out, continually try and find support groups, continually ask those questions to try and get the help that you need. It's so important. Amelia, thank you for joining us here today. It is great. What a remarkable story that you've got. And I still smile at the fact that you say that there's a little piece of you sitting in Minnesota. So I that's probably one thing that I'll remember always about this interview, that, your body's here, but there's a little piece of you sitting in another part of the world, and will always be there.
Yep, that's it.
Thank you for sharing all the layers that you went through. And it is really appreciated, and we're so grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on. It was an absolute pleasure and an honour to be on the show.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode today and supporting the Brain Game Changer and the guests we interview. I hope it added some reassurance or valuable tools, no matter how big or small, that will continue assisting you in being the wonderful game changer that you are. The best way to support the Brain Game Changer podcast is to like, share with family and friends, or subscribe, so each weekly episode is easily available to you. I'd love to hear your feedback, and you can also find me on Instagram @The Brain Game Changer. Drop in and say hello and check out the regular posts about awareness and education on various important topics and issues. Until next time, sending lots of love and light your way and looking forward to sharing the space with you again soon. Take care.